Now we're going to bring in Tom Stephenson. You can go ahead and unmute Tom. Whoop, there you go. There, now I see you're coming in. All right, good. And so first time that I've heard of your company, and I was getting briefed before the show on how to pronounce the name of the company. It's Pajarito Powder.
Very good. That's that important first step is the pronunciation of the name. So.
Yeah, so Pajarito. That's
Pajarito, which I'm told is some mountain in New Mexico, right?
Spanish for something, right? Yeah. What's the origin of the name?
Well, right. So the name literally translated means little bird in Spanish, but the origin of the company and the tie to the name Pajarito is based on the fact that Pajarito Mountain, which is located in northern New Mexico, is the location for Los Alamos National Laboratories.
Uh-huh.
And of course, Los Alamos is probably most famous for its activities during World War II and the development of the atomic bomb. Now today has a $1.8 billion annual budget and does research into a wide variety of topics. And in fact, if you go back about 50 years ago, was doing some of the very earliest work on commercial fuel cells. And the group there that included Byron McCormick then left to go to General Motors and do the very first electrovan that ran on a fuel cell that was the size of a van back in that time, and really started the automotive industry down the process of doing fuel cells. And so Los Alamos is one of the areas that does significant research and is where one of the locations from which we license technology for our company, and was really the genesis for when we started Pajarito Powder. And so we adopted the name from the location of Pajarito Mountain here in northern New Mexico.
So is that, I was just going to say, is that where you're also located then, New Mexico?
Yeah, we are. We're located in Albuquerque, New Mexico, just a little bit to the south, the largest city in the state, but in the southwestern United States. That's right.
Okay.
Well, when I first saw the name, I thought it was Pajarito Power. You are about power, but tell me why the word powder's in the name as well.
Well, so you're not the first one to make that identification. And in fact, the very first time it happened was one of the secretaries of energy was talking about us in used power, and our marketing person had the domain reserved within about 33 minutes, I think. But we are very much involved in power generation through fuel cells, also hydrogen generation. The term powder comes from the fact that that's what we make. We make catalyst powder that is then integrated into the components into either a fuel cell for the consumption of hydrogen in, for example, a fuel cell electric vehicle, for trucks, for trains, for passenger cars, or on the opposite side of the equation, the generation of hydrogen through electrolysis or the creation of green hydrogen as people are coming to describe it more typically.
Yeah, Matt and I are veterans of the Detroit Automotive Show, North American International Auto Show. Except that they haven't had it for the last couple of years, but beyond that point, way back when, I'm trying to think, 15, 20 years ago, fuel cells were like, and that's the way we're going to go. And this poof, nothing really happened. So second time around is going to be the charm or what?
Well, I think absolutely. There's a very systemic change that's going on that reflects why the opportunities for the growth of the hydrogen economy are very substantial today. And I think that the biggest piece of that is the acknowledgement that when you look at broad goals around decarbonization that doesn't only include passenger cars, it needs to include commercial vehicles. And these are over-the-road trucks, delivery trucks, ones that have very different duty cycles from the standard passenger car and very different use lifetimes. So in the sort of classic thinking, you think about the big 18-wheeler, we put on our hat, we get behind the wheel, the big diesel, big rig, and we're now driving 900 to 1,200 miles between a fill-up. And when you start to talk about the amount of energy that's required for that, even with the tremendous advances that have happened with battery technology, it's not going to fit. It's not going to work because of the losses that you have to have in the amount of capacity to cover the weight of the batteries, the recharge times, the distances, and so forth. And so what you're seeing is tremendous implementations, whether it's Hyundai with their Exient product line that's currently running trucks in Switzerland, whether it's Daimler's focus on moving into fuel cell vehicles, Toyota, General Motors. We're seeing a tremendous recognition of these heavy duty applications being the place where you really need hydrogen as part of the overall set of solutions of decarbonizing the transportation industry.
Hmm.
All right. So tell us about how this technology works and why it's an improvement over existing. I know fuel cells, I think, were originally developed for the space program, right? And they were not terribly efficient and hideously expensive, but that didn't really matter because it was NASA and they had all the money in the world in the 60s, right? But
And we were going to the moon. Right.
They've gotten substantially more efficient. And tell us a little bit about how your technology is even a further improvement.
Right. So you're absolutely right that we were using fuel cells on Apollo, and they were incredibly expensive, but it was okay because we're going to the moon. Right. But now today, in order to have a solution that is economically viable, you need to have something that has a tremendous amount of power density and at the same time has a reasonable cost. And if you were to pull apart a fuel cell and look at what makes the basic chemical reaction go, which is pretty simple, you take hydrogen out of a tank, you take oxygen from the air, you combine them together, you get electricity and you get water. And the electricity is then what you use to turn the wheels of the vehicle. Well, in order to get that reaction to go fast enough, down inside the fuel cell, you've got to have a catalyst that accelerates that reaction. And that catalyst is made of precious metal. Specifically, it's made of platinum. And in the case of electrolysis, the opposite effect, if you actually want to make hydrogen, it uses iridium, which is even more expensive. So now you've got this challenge that you've got these precious metals that are built into the cost of the system. And if, depending on the amount that they have, can have a very dramatic impact. And the thing that's been so hard about it for the automotive industry is that it's the only thing in the fuel cell system that you can't build around economies of scale. Right? You can make everything else cheaper on a unit basis by making a lot more of them, building out the molds, the stamps, the devices. But if there's 50 grams of platinum in a single car, there's 50 grams times 500,000 cars to go into 500,000 cars. You can't improve that. And so the only way you can solve that problem is by making the catalyst itself better and reducing the amount of platinum that's ultimately required. And that's what we do. We have next generation catalysts that go into these fuel cell systems for the transportation industry, and they allow them to reduce the amount of platinum by as much as 50%, and therefore bring down the overall cost of the fuel cell system by as much as 20%.
Now, I'm not a chemist, so I'm going to ask a dumb question, but bear with me. Is there some way of creating other catalysts that don't involve precious metals, or is that the only way that we know how to go?
The industry has been trying. And in fact, when we started the company, the first technology that we licensed was using catalysts for non-precious metals. And we have the highest performing precious metal-free catalysts that are available commercially in the world. And we do sell them for certain applications. But the trick for the automotive application that a lot of times the consumer certainly forgets about, people in the automotive industry don't, but the density that is required and the amount of energy that is required to take something that weighs thousands of pounds and move it down the highway, tens of thousands of pounds if you're talking about a truck, move it down the highway at 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, then that takes a tremendous amount of energy. And that problem is extremely hard to solve. And what we have yet to find a catalyst that's ultimately better than platinum. And so the key becomes, how can we make what little platinum we use as effective as possible so that we can use the least amount of it? And that's exactly what we do. And as you get further into it, that's really what's at the core of our value proposition. And I promise that's the end of the chemistry.
No, I like that because that really explained it well. And it's something I really didn't understand. So,
and you're talking about not just trucks, but you're talking about really big vehicles like ocean going freighters and stuff like that too, right?
Right. I mean, that's exactly right. You look at the numbers, at the amount of pollution that is kicked out by one of the largest super tankers in the world. I mean, it's the equivalent of millions and millions of cars. And so to really be able to move the needle on the reduction of those emissions, you have to have solutions for those. And in general, the longer the distance and the heavier the load, the more attractive the fuel cell option becomes. So when you talk about it for ocean going vessels, when you talk about it for trains, it's another very key application. When you talk about it for these long distance vehicles, and eventually you talk about it for aviation. Aviation is going to take a while, but eventually you talk about it for aviation. All of these become solutions for which fuel cells are extremely attractive.
But you don't see it in today's, or not today's, but tomorrow's passenger vehicles. You don't see it happening there or not?
Oh, absolutely. And what's interesting is that most of the car companies continue to do development work and have been continuing to do development work on hydrogen electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles. The issue that exists for passenger cars that gets addressed fairly well with trucks and any sort of fleet application is the availability of hydrogen refueling infrastructure. And so, Hyundai makes vehicles today. Toyota makes vehicles today. Honda has been making them. And if you live in California, you can lease these vehicles from one of these companies and you can drive that as your everyday car. You can only do it in California in the United States because it's the only place that has a reasonable amount of hydrogen refueling stations for the end consumer. So we're just dealing with a little bit of the chicken and egg. But as more stations get built out for trucking applications, which are much easier to dictate with fleet operations, then you start to have more stations available, which makes it possible to then get the implementation of more passenger cars.
And then you'd have all them truck stops around America would have hydrogen fueling stations right there, right? You're pulling in for a meal or a shower, and while you're doing that, you can get all fueled up with hydrogen, right?
Right, and that's the starting point. And the estimates are that you could blanket the country with about 350 to 400 hydrogen refueling stations for long-haul applications. And so the level of infrastructure build-out is much, much less than a Tesla, which put in thousands, 3,000 to 5,000 charging stations around the country to make sure that they had adequate recharging capability for their early vehicles. And so you're able to address that with fleets. And again, with fleets, you can do the logistics to say, all right, our trucks are going to stop at these specific places as they go across the country or do their various deliveries and pickups. And so that will address the issue. And you're exactly right. It'll be at the truck stop. You'll go in and you'll grab your meal, you get your shower, you'll refuel and be back out on the road. And then consumers will be able to access that as well. The early adopters.
Are you working with any automakers now for passenger car application?
We're working with pretty much every automotive company that has a serious fuel cell program. Unfortunately, most of them we can't talk about because we're under NDA. I can mention that we're working together with General Motors on a project for heavy duty applications that's sponsored by the Department of Energy. That's public. And of course, we just announced a couple of months ago that we received a substantial equity investment from Hyundai Motor Group out of Korea.
Okay. Well, we're running out of time in this segment. So if folks want to reach out to you, website, email address, phone number, whatever you want to share.
Right. So our website is www.pajaritopowder.com.
You might want to spell that. You might want to spell that.
I will. But Matt, you can also get there with www.pajaritopower.com. So either one of them works. But it's PAJARITOPOWDER.com. You can also look for us on LinkedIn. We're very active there and we'll accept connections and get connected that way as well. My first initial T, last name Stephenson, STEPHENSON at pajaritopowder.com is available as well, or the simpler info at pajaritopowder.com.